to really make sure, first and foremost, that we're playing in tune and we're playing all the right notes. You might have heard me talk about this in earlier videos, but just in case you didn't watch those, I'll talk about it here. So the first step is knowing the notes, right? A lot of students sort of skip this step. They learn about 75% of the notes, and then the other notes are sort of, they're debatable. We're not sure if we know the notes. Maybe your brain knows the notes. Your brain is like, yeah, that's a B flat. But our left hand, our fingers, do not learn music as quickly as our brains. So even if your brain is like, yeah, I know what that note is, your fingers will need several more repetitions to learn what the note is. And we want our muscles to also know music we're playing, because our muscles are more reliable once they learn things, and you won't have to make a bajillion recordings of this if you keep playing a wrong note. If your fingers know it, you can just let them do the work, and you can just hear the music. Okay, so the best way to really make sure you're playing all of the right notes and you're playing them in tune is practice finger before bow. Now you might have already seen this in another video. You can fast forward through if you have. So finger before bow is a way of practicing that I use and I encourage my students to use. So if we're going to look at the first measure of Excerpt 3, so as you can see, my bow moving and my putting fingers down are two separate events. Place, 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 place. So this method of practicing does two things. It helps teach your left hand what the right notes are quicker than just playing it through at a faster tempo. Secondly, it prevents you from doing this sort of thing, which is something, it's an easy trap for a lot of students to fall into, is, oh, I can hear when it sounds like the right note, so I'm just going to kind of guess with my left hand, and if it's wrong, then I'll slide, and then I'll be playing the right note. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually work that way, because the listener will hear you sliding around and will hear, oh, this person does not know how to play in tune, which might not be true. Maybe you are really good at playing in tune. You just forgot to practice finger before bow. Okay, so we want you to play your highest level, right, that you're capable of, and finger before bow is a really helpful tool to get there. Okay, so once you know what all of the notes are, then we can start adding the bowings. Now, just a little side note, I wouldn't recommend that you always start from the beginning when you practice. The wrong way to practice is playing the etude through, until however many times you need to get it right? Because that could be thousands of times. It's best to pick out the trickiest spots. So for me, the part I had to practice the most for preparing this was, I don't have the measure numbers, but it's, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the sixth line, the first two measures of the sixth line. So, the reason why I had to practice those two measures more than any of the other ones is there's a lot of shifting involved, and we go above third position. So we really want to make sure that we're playing the right notes there. So yeah, when I was practicing this, I probably spent a majority of the time on those two measures because the other ones were not as difficult for me. Now, for you, there might be other measures that are also difficult. So when you're practicing something, especially if it's more of a challenge like the Excerpt 3, make sure to isolate spots that are hard for you. And maybe you're not used to even figuring out which spots you need to isolate. So if that's the case, I would recommend taking a pencil with your practice with your practice music in your stand, and every time you play and you have to stop playing, or you get confused, or you play a wrong note, stop and then circle that measure. And then once you have a general idea about which measures are problem measures, then you can focus on those. Now, I wouldn't do this isolating technique until I've practiced everything through finger before bow, right? So there's a base level of knowledge, and then once there's a base level of knowledge, you can figure out which parts are just technically a little more tricky. Okay, so after we have all the notes down, we can add the fingerings. Or we can add the bowings. Sorry, not the fingerings. We already know the fingerings. We can add the bowings. So with this etude, there's actually not a ton of slurs. I think the more frequent thing that comes is different kinds of articulations. So the beginning, we have really short staccatos. And then around this second line, we suddenly get these tenuto marks. So we want to have more sustained stroke. And don't forget to crescendo. We have mezzo forte, and what I would do to make that crescendo really pop is just really make sure the last two notes of that crescendo, you're using a lot of bow. So if I were to do that slower, see, the last two notes have more notes or more bow than any of the others. Save, 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 spend, spend. And then after that spot, then we go back to slurs and staccato. So I move a little bit closer to the frog before I get to the first measure of the third line. So I'm in the middle here, and then on that first staccato, I travel closer to the frog because it's easier to get an articulation on that up bow. Okay, also on this figure I just played, make sure to add the accents. So if you're someone who comes in, sends a audition video, and you play every single articulation, they're really gonna notice that, and they're gonna say, "Oh, this person, they know what they're doing. They're playing accents, they're playing staccatos, they're playing tenutos. Like, we want this person in the best orchestra that they can get in." Okay, so oh, right. Okay, so about stroke. This is it's a little faster. We have staccatos, so it's going to tend toward an off the string stroke. Now, off the string strokes are tricky. They're hard for everybody. They're hard for professionals. My advice that I give to my students, and the way I look at staccatos, is I don't try to make the bow bounce off the string. I don't try to force it off the string. I think more about making the beginning of the note clear. So if I were to play this and I really try to make the bow come off the string, it would sound like this. So any of you who have been working on off the string strokes, that sound might be a little familiar too. You can't seem to make it sound, or otherwise it just doesn't come off. So my advice is, when you're first learning this, don't worry about it coming off the string. You want to have a good, clear sound. You want to make sure you're playing all the right notes, playing really in tune notes. And also, you just want to make sure each note has a really clear beginning, almost like it's starting with a K sound. Once you get a feel for that articulation at the beginning of the note, as you speed up, as you get more comfortable with the notes, the bow just comes a little more naturally off the string. It kind of bounces a little more naturally. The thing with off the string strokes is you don't want to make the bow do anything. You want the bow to settle into its own bounciness. So just do your best with the off the string stroke, and remain patient with yourself if you're struggling, because I can guarantee that everybody else is struggling with it. It's a tricky stroke. I struggle with it, but I've worked on it for a lot, and I've gotten better at it. And the same thing will happen with you. All right, I think that's about it. So good luck, and happy practicing.